Hey, what's up, VC? It's Steve again, Harmless Rebel. It's time for a new edition of What's Spinning. This one's pretty much going to be CDs, just stuff I've been spinning in the office and in the car, probably for the last month or so. If you are on Facebook, you may have seen a lot of these because I usually post what I'm spinning for the day. But if not, some cool stuff in here, some rare stuff that you don't see that often. We'll start off with one of the new releases that came out 2 or 3 months ago. Really killer thrash. This was originally released in '92, and this was done by Retroactive Records. This is Detritus. Like I said, just really killer thrash. Very much in the vein of the Bay Area. They were definitely influenced by the Bay Area. They recently released their 2 albums. This one on CD and vinyl. They actually released it under this cover. However, I kind of dug the original cover, so I flipped it around. Definitely worth checking this one out, though. Highly recommend picking this one up. I don't remember if it was this one or the one before this, but Aaron just showed in one of his last videos, which is a few months ago, but showed an original pressing, but I don't remember if it was this one or the album before it. But like I said, really good thrash, definitely worth having in your collection. I've kind of been on kind of an old school death metal kick, which is what's playing in the background. We've got the I believe this is the most recent Obituary album. Kind of a throwback. I loved Obituary's first 3 albums, and then I just kind of lost interest in them. I didn't like the direction they were going, and for the last couple albums, I've really liked. They've kind of gone back to that original sound, and this one is definitely worth picking up. This is from 2017. I think it was late 2017 when this was released. Really good album, though. And then in that same vein, this was 92 or 93 when this came out, and I loved this when it came out. I heard the band's most recent album. It did nothing for me. I just love the old school death metal from about 89 to about 94 is kind of my sweet spot. I love that. And then part of that is just, 92-ish is when I really got into death metal, and was when I was in it the most hardcore. Now it's more of I'll get in the mood here and there and throw some on, but it's not something I go and seek out. But I was out a few weeks ago and I ran across this for $4. It's an original pressing of Breeding the Spawn from Suffocation. This was their second album, I believe. I believe their first album came out the year before this, but just really cool traditional death metal. Suffocation was such a great band. And I really liked Frank's vocals during this period. So one I highly recommend picking up. This is one I had never heard before. I had never seen this one before. I don't think this is my favorite from the band, but it's still a really solid album. But this is Dreaming Neon Black from Nevermore. Nevermore is just one of those bands that you never go wrong with it. Even not your this not being my favorite, Nevermore is still a killer album and definitely worth having in your collection. This next one, I already had this first album, but this is a 2-album set. I didn't have the album that followed it, so I went ahead and picked this one up. I don't think there was any bonus material or anything. I mainly bought it for that second album. I got it for really cheap, but this is Oddfellows Rest and Equilibrium from Crowbar. I'm a huge Crowbar fan. The funny thing about this is the first CD is Oddfellows Rest, which is not just my favorite Crowbar album. I think it's one of the heaviest albums ever released. It is kind of the definition of sludge metal. I mean, it's just slow and brooding and dark and heavy. Highly recommend checking out Oddfellows Rest. Then they followed up with Equilibrium. I remember liking it when I gave it a spin the other day. It was just okay. Their albums following it were much better. Actually, the coolest song on here was the cover of Dreamweaver. But still a cool little set, and I picked it up for $4 or $5, so it was definitely worth grabbing. Although I still have my original copy of Oddfellows Rest that I bought in I want to say it was 98 or 99 when that came out, but don't quote me. It was right in that area though. Next up, this is one that was just released by Rox Records. I had never heard of this band, and I wasn't sure what to expect. And of all of the Rox Records releases and No Life Till Metal releases that have come out lately, all of which have been really good, this is the one that's really stuck with me, and this is the one I've really been listening to the most. And this is Blood by Red Sea. It's got a member of Badlands in the band, and that's probably the band that I would most compare them to, although they don't quite sound like Badlands. But this is just really killer, really bluesy, hard rock, heavy metal. I've really enjoyed this, and the more I listen to it, the more I enjoy it. I ended up getting this one on CD and vinyl, and for a while there I had this playing in my car, and I was spinning the vinyl quite a bit. This will be pretty heavy in my rotation. This one originally came out in it doesn't say on the back. Oh, there we go, 94. Really killer though, blues based heavy metal and hard rock. Oh, let's see where we want to go next. Next up, this is one I just picked up a few days ago. I was really shocked to walk into my store and see this. This is an album I refused to listen to when it came out. As a matter of fact, when did this come out? It had to be 95-ish. Let me see. It doesn't say on the back. I want to say it was about 95. I could be off by a year or two. I can't remember exactly. It was before I went in the Navy, though, and I went in the Navy the first... it had to have come out... Yeah, I want to say it was 95. Doesn't matter. Regardless, Motley Crue was one of my favorite bands. When they announced Vince Neil was leaving the band and they were going to release another album with a new singer, I didn't want anything to do with it, and I refused to listen to it. I had saw Hooligan's Holiday pop up a few times on MTV, and I would just change the channel. I just wasn't interested. It was literally like 3 or 4 years ago when I finally got a copy of this and gave it a spin. I tend to agree with Nikki Sixx. Had they changed the name of the band for the releases with John Corabi, I think it would have been a very successful album or a very successful venture. I think what killed it was they kept the name Motley Crue. If they had switched it to Hooligan's Holiday or anything else, I think this would have been a really success. And it's a really killer album. And what makes this really stand out is not just John Corabi's vocals. The vocal writing is really good. John Corabi wrote a lot of the lyrics here. Additionally, John Corabi's a guitar player, so they had a really solid rhythm player in John Corabi, and the guitar tones are just really nice. And there are some songs on here that almost have a southern hard rock tinge to them too. But really killer album. I found this Japanese pressing for like $6.99. And I grabbed it. There's a couple more Motley Crue Japanese pressings that I'll show at another time. But like I said, I was really happy to run across this. Next up, actually the same day I bought that, I bought this as well. I already had a copy of this, but I gave it to somebody as a gift in a VCLT a while back. And I kind of regret it. I picked it up for like $2.99. This is the debut from Adrenaline Mom Omerta. I don't speak Italian, so I'm not sure if that's the correct way of saying it. But this is the original lineup with... I can't think of the drummer's name. It's going to drive me nuts. It's before AJ Pirro joined the band, and it had Mike Portnoy. I don't know why I couldn't get that out. This album is great. I like pretty much everything Adrenaline Mob released. But this and the Covers EP, which also featured Mike Portnoy, are my favorites. He was involved heavily in the writing, and I just think these were better albums than the later ones with AJ Pirro. Not take away from what AJ's drumming. He's an amazing drummer. I just prefer these albums, and this is one I definitely recommend. Next up, this album is one of the most ridiculous covers, but it's an absolutely amazing album. So Tourniquet was picked up by Metal Blade for, I believe, just 2 releases, this one and the follow-up. And they're actually 2 of my favorite Tourniquet albums. Just super solid. And now that Ted Kirkpatrick has released some of that old stuff, hopefully these get represses. I don't know if he owns the rights to them or if Metal Blade does. But whoever does, I would really love to see these 2 albums get repressed. I mean, they were firing on all cylinders with this album. And it is one of my, and it may be my favorite Tourniquet album. The album cover is just kind of ridiculous, though. But another one I recommend picking up. Taking it back to the old school, a little bit of Udo. No reason that I pulled this out other than I saw it sitting there. I was like, let's give that a spin. Mean Machine. Just Udo Dirkshire. It's just a great, solid album. I thought this came out earlier, though. 89. I thought this was 87 or 88, but this is a German pressing I ran across a few years back. Another just really killer traditional metal band that they weren't around for long. I believe they had 2 full-length albums. Both albums were just killer, and then they just disappeared. I don't know the whole story. This is a really nice French pressing, though, of After the Fall from Grace, from Savage Grace. Recommend picking up both of their albums and the EP. Actually, I have a single disc. It's their first album and their EP together on one disc. Just a really killer band, though. And if you haven't checked them out, definitely worth looking into. Let's see what else we got going here. Next up, a little bit of Gravedigger. Just one of the great power metal bands. I'm not sure where Gravedigger's from. I want to say they're German, but I could be wrong. Regardless, like I said, just killer power. Gravedigger always seems to be in my whenever I'm get on these listening kicks, I usually end up throwing in the Gravedigger CD. They're just one of those bands that never kind of leaves the rotation. And this is a great album. Not much to really say about that one. This one's really cool right here. This is Primal Fear Horoscope. So this is an EP that has a couple of new songs and a couple of covers. And actually the Horoscope I thought was a cover of the Overkill song, but it's not. It's actually their own song. But they also cover, what else is here? Out in the Fields from Gary Moore, Breaker from Accept, and Kill the King from Dio. Was that? No, that was Rainbow. I'm sorry, Kill the King from Rainbow. And then they have their songs Under the Spell and Horoscope on here. What's cool about this is it's a die-cut disc. And I love that it actually, yeah, let me pull it out so you can actually see it a little bit better. But that's basically the logo from their first album. Very cool, though. I really dig stuff like this. But I love that it actually has a disclaimer on the back that says, do not use in car stereo systems. I don't know if you can see that. I thought that was amusing, though. Next up, this is a killer album that gets no love, even from fans of this band, which blows me away. It does have a stupid name, and even the band agrees that the name is stupid. But what's really special about this album is this was a reunion of the original lineup. But this is Annihilator, Criteria for a Black Widow. And I'm trying to think, it's not the best album cover either. They wanted to call it, what was the song? Give me a second. was it Loving the Sinner? They wanted to name it after one of the other songs on the album, and BMG refused to release it under that name, and BMG chose the name Criteria for a Black Widow, which is actually the weakest song on the album. It was really cool to get the original lineup back together after, I think they had been apart for 10 or 12 years at this point. And, I mean, they just absolutely kill it. This album is super, super good. And it just gets no love. And like I said, I don't know why. I don't know if just the cover threw people off, or they didn't like Criteria for Black Widow. I don't know. It's a great album, though, and it's one that you should check out. And then there's a couple more offshoots here. They're also good albums that much of the band's following just kind of turned away from. This one is Infected from Hammerfall. Hammerfall changed up everything on this album. The logo changed, the album design, the music slightly changes. It's still Hammerfall, but they add a little more traditional metal to this. I don't know if they were going for the MTV crowd or what. A lot of people say they went commercial here. It's not commercial at all. It's just really good, straight up metal with some power metal elements. But this is Infected. I don't know if you can see the hand. Really killer album cover, though, and it's kind of got a zombie theme going through it. Really killer, though. I really dig this album, even for all the hate that it got. Oh, that's cool. I never noticed that before. That's just a slide in. There's actually so you can choose the cover that you want, I guess. That's kind of cool, though. And then next up, Halloween. This is Seven Sinners. It's the same thing. They kind of changed things up a little bit. A lot of people didn't like this album. I really dig it, though. Halloween is one of those bands. I definitely prefer the first few albums with Kai Hansen, just like everybody else. And a lot of people kind of lost interest after that. But they've been putting out solid albums this whole time. And this is one from a few years ago. This is, I want to say 2008, 2010. There we go, 2010. Just really solid Halloween. I mean, if you like Halloween, you're going to like this album. Next up, this album is awesome. This is the demo from Deliverance, and with a couple of additional tracks on it. This was released 2019 by Retroactive Records. This is one that Scott Waters has been hyping up for quite some time, and for very good reason. This is Greeting of Death. This was originally released cassette only. It's now been released as a record, the CD, and the cassette. I bought the bundle with all of them. I've got the cassette. I'll never open the cassette. There's no reason to. But I've been playing the heck out of this too. Just really raw. They still kind of have that punk feel, like other early thrash bands. Just really killer. And if you're a fan of Deliverance, you're going to love this. It's also got a couple of tracks too. A Space Called You and Attack. I believe those are both from Comps. A Space Called You is probably my favorite song on here, to be perfectly honest. But I just love the rawness and the punk edge to the demo. And I've talked about that. You know, the punk tinge thrash of the early to mid 80s is some of my favorite stuff. I love when they still have that the punk in there. Next up, I got to talking about this, or somebody got to talking about this, and I was messaging them about the album version of this. It has shot up in price. It's going for $200+ now, and I do have a copy of it, but it was only released as a double picture disc, and while it sounds good, it doesn't sound great. So I ended up pulling this out and giving it a spin again. It's just a really good album. But this is a Devil Put Dinosaurs there from Alice in Chains. This next one's pretty good too. It's not a great album. I don't know why it's advertised the way it is, but this is World on Fire, and it's Slash featuring Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators. you just don't hear a lot of Slash here. Miles Kennedy's a great singer. He's a great guitar player in his own right, and this just sounds like Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators. There's a couple solos mixed throughout here that are really cool, and this is a good album. It's just not, you just don't hear Slash here like what you're thinking, you know what I mean? Definitely worth checking out, definitely worth having, especially if you're a Miles Kennedy fan. But this is more of a showing for Miles Kennedy and the Conspirators than it is for Slash. Next up is Malice. This is a New Breed of Gods. I can't remember exactly what the deal is with this one. I believe they had a new singer for this album. They hadn't released an album in something like 10 years at this point. This is 2012. It may have been even longer than that. It may have been the 80s when their last album came out. Regardless, they got back together, new singer, and they decided to basically rewrite or re-record a bunch of their early tracks. And then there's, I think, 3 or 4 new songs on here. I've heard a lot of people complain that they would rather listen to the originals. And I have the first 2 Malice albums. I really dig them. I really dig this too, though. I really like when bands go back and revisit their old material. And I've talked about this before. Testament did it with First Strike Still Deadly, which is one of my favorite Testament albums right now. Quite a few bands have done it. Destruction did it with Thrash Anthems. So I like when bands do that. A lot of them are better players now than they were back, in the late 80s, early 90s. So definitely, if you're a fan of Malice, I do recommend picking this up. And then it also comes with the DVD with some live stuff, live in '87, and in the making of. So pretty cool. Next up, I believe this was Rob Halford's first release after he left Judas Priest. This was 93's War of Words from Fight. I hadn't listened to this in years, at least a decade. So when I pulled this out and spun it, it was a really nice little nostalgic hour of music listening. I love this album. All the stuff that Rob Halford did during that period when he wasn't in, whether it was Halford or Fight or there's one other band too that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. It's all good stuff, but this album absolutely kills. This is great stuff. Highly recommend checking that one out. This was kind of cool. Let's see, we're gonna see 22 minutes. Yeah, we'll probably call it in just a second here. Next up, I've shown this recently, probably about 6-8 months ago when the reissue was released on vinyl. I had never seen the CD with the original cover, so I was really shocked to run across this in one of my local UCD stores. But this is the original Intense pressing of Postmortem Affliction for Mortification with the original album cover. It was later released. I don't even know if it may have been by Intense too, but the release I had always seen had a totally different cover. And like I said, I thought it was really cool to run across the CD with the original. I think it was like $6 or $7 too. So I mean, it was definitely worth it. Back to the Udo. This is another one I just pulled out and felt like spinning. This is a UK pressing of Hungry Years from Accept. And it's just basically a best of comp. It's got Fast as a Shark, Burning Son of a Bitch, Princess of the Dawn, I'm a Rebel, Breaker, Relentless and Wild, The King, and Midnight Highway. My battery's about to die, so we will be ending this very shortly. Next up, one of the all-time great thrash albums. This one is a must-have, and this one also includes the Flag of Hate EP, but this is Pleasure to Kill. Probably Creator's best album, without a doubt. And it's a must-have for any thrash. Sorry, my allergies are really bad right now. I just got done dusting this area, and I can just kind of feel it coming at me. Next up, Mass Fighter. This was just released by No Life Till Metal Records, and I've been playing the heck out of this. This is actually Mass's debut album that was shelved by the record label. It didn't get an actual release until the 90s. I want to say the late 90s, early 2000s. And Scott got with the band, and they ended up releasing the album. And then the B-side, there's also an additional, 7 tracks, which includes the rough mixes and one live, Holy One live. The live stuff is okay, or the studio rough mixes are okay. The main album is absolutely phenomenal, though. I love the whole thing. I've been playing the heck out of this. If you like Mass, you're going to love this. This is their true debut, and is definitely a must-have. Next up, one of John Oliva's side projects, the return of the Mountain King, John Oliva of Savatage, and this is Taj Mahal, and it sounds like Savatage. Just a really killer, really solid album. All of his stuff sounds like Savatage, and it's all worth grabbing if you run across that. Next up, Scott and Jeff kind of got me on a Primal Fear kick. I've been listening to a lot of Primal Fear. I've got 2 more of the albums here that I'm probably going to spin later on today. This is Seven Seals. They just don't have a bad album, and all of their stuff is getting pressed on vinyl right now. I don't have the money for it. I've been just buying crazy amounts of vinyl lately, but I will start picking up this stuff as I run across it. You can't go wrong with any of the Primal Fear. It's just really solid, straight up metal. And then let's see, a little blues-based sleaze, 6s, 7s, and 9s from Junkyard. If you're into sleaze, you guys know Junkyard. I'm not going to get into it too much. This is not as good as their debut, but it's still a really solid album. And then last but not least, the era of Danzig that people seem to hate. A lot of it's because John Christ was out of the band at this point. I understand. This is still a really good album, though. This is 666 by Danzig, Satan's Child. Gave this a spin yesterday. That's it, guys. Take care, and I will see you soon.